Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on demand care for common ailments such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stluke'sonline.org.
In collaboration with Boise State Public Radio, the Community Library presents a new podcast, Sheep Stories. I'm host Vance Cunningham. Join me as we listen through the archives of the Trailing of the Sheep Festival to learn about the Scottish, Basque, and Peruvian immigrants foundational to the sheep herding industry over the past century. Hear their stories of traveling to Idaho and learning the language of the sheep. Find Sheep Stories wherever you get your podcasts and at boisestatepublicradio.org.
More Idaho Matters now from the studios of Boise State Public Radio News. I'm Gemma Gaudette. Over the years, the job of a district superintendent in Idaho has changed drastically, requiring more from the role and those who take it on. We're talking increasing workloads, insufficient staff, and lagging compensation have made a job which was once considered a privilege into one that many may no longer want. Reporter Emma Epperly with Idaho Education News took a deep dive into these issues in a new series on the superintendency, and she's joining us now to talk more about this. Emma, nice to have you back on the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Okay, so Emma, you spent 9 months putting this series together. Can you start out by telling us a little bit about what drew you to the issue in the first place?
Yeah, so I got a really great grant from the Education Writers Association to help make this series possible and help me drive all over Idaho to put this together. And that grant was really focused on the leadership pipeline in public school districts. And once I started talking to people and just doing some reporting, the superintendency really stuck out to me. I think because it is kind of an opaque job. A lot of people don't know what school district superintendents do. And in Idaho, what superintendents do really varies from region to region, job to job. And so that's kind of what drew me into doing the larger series focused on the superintendency.
So you actually spent a day with Highland Superintendent Tana Kellogg, who seems to be just one of a lot of superintendents that really, I guess, for the lack of a better term, wear multiple hats in their position. Can you talk to us a bit about your experience with her?
Yeah, so we profiled two superintendents for the project. Tana Kellogg is the superintendent, like you said, at Highland, which is in Craigmont, Idaho, kind of near Lewiston, for those down south who might not know. And so she oversees a school district that she's really the only district-wide administrator. It's a K-12 school in one building. And the district has 196 students and 18 teachers with an annual budget of about $3 million, just to kind of give some perspective. And so often you'll find Tana kind of tucked away in her little office. It's right at the front of the school building. It's like the size of a walk-in closet. And mostly she does paperwork. And she does paperwork not just for typical superintendent things like reporting the budget or running a bunch of state reports, but she also does the paperwork for special education services, for the athletics department, because she's also the athletics director. She does all of the federal reports, pretty much any piece of paperwork that has to be filed with the school, with the state, federal government, anywhere. Tana Kellogg has a hand on it. And so often in bigger districts, that paperwork load will be spread across multiple people. But she's really taken it all on, in part so that the school can have a principal that is just a dedicated principal. In some school districts, the superintendent will also be the principal at like the elementary school or at the high school. And she told me she chose to do that so that there would be kind of more steps if there are disciplinary issues. So, the principal can make a ruling and then she might need to bring in Tana to help. So just so that there's more kind of layers of leadership there. So yeah, it's an interesting job at a small school like that.
So, how widespread is this issue of kind of like the, a superintendent wearing multiple hats like you just described?
Yeah, so it's really common in rural school districts. There are a lot of superintendents who have multiple, I guess you would consider them jobs. I think the best way to kind of answer that is to compare it to like a larger school district. A big school district like West Ada, which is the state's largest school district, they have a superintendent, and then they have assistant superintendents, and then they have a leadership team, and then they have um, department heads that report to the leadership team. And those departments might be special education, federal programs, curriculum. Um, there might be an instructional lead,
Hmm.
kind of over these different areas. And then there's obviously budgeting, so finance. Um, so there are departments for each of these areas. And in a small school district, not only does all of that fall on the superintendent, but they might have an additional task like being the athletic director or you know some superintendents drive school bus or they're also the
Wow.
principal. So it's really common at rural smaller school districts to have superintendents who just do a bunch of different things.
So you mentioned you did spend time with two superintendents. The other one, my understanding, is Sean Teagues, who is part of a mid-sized college town. So kind of talk to us about the difference you saw in his day-to-day duties compared to Tana's.
Yeah, so Sean Teagues is the superintendent in Moscow, which is where the University of Idaho is located. And he was really interesting to profile because he had been the superintendent at Nez Perce, which is also a small rural school district, and now he's at a bigger school district. So, for comparison, Moscow has just over 2,100 students. It has six school buildings and 140 teachers with an annual budget of just under $29 million. So, when we're looking at that in comparison to Highland, it's just a lot bigger. Like Highland has a $3 million budget, Moscow has a $29 million budget. So, um, it's a lot bigger, and he has a team that really does a lot of this work for him and manages it. I mean,
Hmm.
it's a bigger budget, it's more students, but he's got someone in charge of finance, and he's got a special education director. And so his job is really to look at the future of the district, to look at the big picture, to determine what decisions need to be made, and then get the right people in the room to make those decisions. Um, each superintendent has their own tone that they take and how they do that. Sean Teagues really likes to be out and in the school buildings and the classroom. He kind of joked with us, he hates being in his office. And so he's always out trying to meet with building leaders where they're at, to coordinate new programs, and kind of bringing people together to make these decisions because it's a lot harder to implement a change across six school buildings with almost 200 teachers in comparison to one school building with less than 20 teachers.
Hmm. Oh, so Emma, for context here, how much are superintendents on average here in Idaho getting paid?
Yeah, so I don't have the average number like off the top of my head.
Hmm.
But the um you know historically there was kind of like a general formula where they're making a couple times what teachers are making. And kind of the issue is that pay wise, the increase in pay is just not keeping up with the increase in pay that teachers are seeing.
Mm.
And so I think the most poignant example in the series is Lance Hansen, who was the 2025 Idaho Superintendent of the Year. He was superintendent in Lewiston, and he was making about $166,000. Just a few weeks after he got that award, he accepted the superintendent job in Kennewick, Washington, where he's going to be making $294,000.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, yeah, so a lot of Idaho superintendents can jump to another state and make double or triple, depending on, the size of the school district. and some other factors. And that's not just for like Washington, that's also true
Mm-hmm.
for superintendents to go to like Montana or Wyoming or Utah. So it's it's a big pay difference. And then superintendents work a longer schedule, more contracted days than a teacher. And so what you'll see is sometimes, the superintendent's daily pay rate isn't that much higher than a school principal's. And
Mm-hmm.
then the other big pay disparity is between superintendent jobs. So at a small school district, even Lewiston, which is a mid-sized school district, they're making $166,000. Well, you can make that much money as like a building level administrator in Boise or West Ada. And so um, some people are just choosing, I have my superintendent certification, but I'm going to stay here where I'm a building principal or I'm a district level leader. So maybe like your special education director or your head of curriculum at a larger school district, they
Mm-hmm.
can stay in that role and make significantly more money than being the top leader, being the superintendent at a smaller school district. And so that's also kind of part of the pay disparity conversation is between
Mm-hmm.
small school districts and larger school districts.
So then, Emma, I would assume that this impacts the application pool, correct?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because, I mean, literally the scenario that you just told us about. I mean, some of these people in the larger school districts are probably not going to, you know, truly in some ways, even though the pay may be the same, it's in a way taking a pay cut because you're doing a bigger job.
Yeah. So that's a big part of kind of the picture here, looking at the superintendency. So um, I had kind of a nice anecdote. So Rich Bauscher, who was a longtime superintendent and taught at the University of Idaho, future superintendents, his last class before he retired this year was 8 students, and only one was thinking about actually becoming a superintendent. A lot of them were either already in the job and just retroactively getting their certification, but like 5 of them said, I don't want the stress of that job. So a lot of
Mm,
superintendent jobs, especially in small, more rural areas, you used to see, uh, 5, 6, 7 applicants, and now some of those areas are lucky to get 1 or 2 applicants. And so it just is reducing the choice for school boards, and also a lot of those applicants who are applying at these smaller, more rural jobs, they don't have their superintendent certification yet, so they would have to get that certification to actually have the job. But that doesn't mean that there aren't enough people who are licensed to be superintendents in the state of Idaho. There are 491 people who have an active superintendent license right now in the state, 121 full or part-time superintendent positions. And then there are 22 assistant superintendent positions in 17 school districts. So
mm,
really, there's like 140 jobs for people with those superintendent licenses. And there are 491 people who have licenses in the state, active in the state right now. So there are people who are qualified, but it's just hard to get applicants.
mhm. So with that said, Emma, talk to us about the turnover that's happening in this position, because my understanding is that Idaho's rate is quite above the national average.
Yeah, so 71% of Idaho school districts have had at least one instance of turnover in the last 5 years. Um, and then I think the more kind of surprising numbers are 6.3% of school districts have had 3 or more superintendents in the last 5 years. And then
Oh.
18.2% have had 2 um, superintendent turnover events in the last 5 years, which is a lot higher than, the national numbers. Where so 44% of school districts on the national level have had one instance of turnover in the last 5 years. And Idaho's rate is 71%. So there's a lot more turnover. Superintendents aren't staying in the job for a long time. Nationally, it's about 5 years on average. But still, Idaho's rate is significantly higher than in other states.
And Emma, politics and education also came up as a big concern in your reporting. So, what kind of stress is this adding to the job as well?
Yeah, so I think one thing I want to talk about a little bit related to turnover in politics is, um, we've been talking quite a bit about at these smaller districts, these superintendents are taking on all these roles that are filled by
Hmm.
people at bigger districts. And Idaho's rate of growth in the in administrative jobs is pretty low compared to the national level. They're just, it's not growing as much. So there might be more reporting requirements, there might be more work for these superintendents, and they're not adding people to do that work. It's just kind of all piling on the superintendents. And part of that is politics. Um, a lot of superintendents, so we did a survey of Idaho superintendents and kind of asked them to tell us what their biggest job stressors are. The number one stressor was money, so both school funding and paying teachers, just kind of anything money related. Number two was legislation and politics. So a lot of superintendents just feel like it's this kind of constant thing that they have to keep up with. Every legislative session, there are sometimes dozens of law changes that they have to implement, and then it happens all over again like 9 months later. And so keeping up with those law changes is part of the politics, but also just having these conversations with um, families. There's a lot of questions about what's being taught in school. Superintendents are saying they kind of have to fight against online misinformation. And then they
Hmm.
also, superintendents are hired by a board of trustees that are elected officials. And while those positions are nonpartisan, these are still, elected officials who were voted for by their communities. And so there is kind of that push and pull too of that's who they report to. But often, those trustees aren't experts in schools. And so it is this another avenue where politics have become a part of superintendents' jobs.
Hmm. Well, Emma, I know there's so much more to talk about, but I appreciate the time you've given us today. We've been speaking with reporter Emma Epperly with Idaho Education News. If you want to take a deeper dive into these issues, Emma does have a new series on the superintendency, and you can check all of that out at Idaho Education News. You've been listening to Idaho Matters from Boise State Public Radio. I'm Gemma Gaudette.